Welcome back for another episode of Christian Conspiracy Coalition, a place where the best minds of the conspiracy realm gather to share and discuss their faith, Christianity, and the spiritual war thrust upon humanity. All across the Western world, governments are deliberately and systematically targeting free speech and the ability to express one's opinions. In an age where the state is all too enthusiastic to curtail our speech and thoughts, what does this mean for us as Christians? For most of us who are paying attention, this has been a long time coming. Yet in recent years, the acceleration of this agenda has truly been horrifying. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't concerned about the rapidly evolving changes to speech and information sharing. Yet no matter how anxious or worried I get, this impending Orwellian censorship I find solace in Deuteronomy 31:6, which states, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them. For the Lord goes on with you. Will never leave your side, nor will he forsake you." Depriving us of our most fundamental human rights, the ability to speak and be heard, is a massive assault on humanity. To help me dive into the implications of this developing censorship, I am joined by Brandon Kroll of the Manna Daily podcast.
Hey, Drew, thanks for having me back on.
Anytime, brother. Heidi Love from Unfiltered Rise.
Hello, happy to be here.
Welcome back, Heidi. We've missed you for a hot minute now.
Yes, the grandbaby. Grandbaby's busting in on Saturdays.
That's okay. You got a bigger purpose going on there, my friend.
Yes.
And next up, Luca from Justified Belief podcast. Welcome back, Luca.
Thanks for having me back, Drew.
This is a wild, wild topic, guys, and we've been talking about this in the back channels, mostly spurred on by some of the crazy Orwellian stuff that seems to keep happening in Australia. We seem to be the canary in the coal mine when it comes to this type of thing. We're the template for the New World Order in a lot of ways. But before we really get stuck into the minutiae of today's topic, we do really need to address the change in how governments have approached the sharing of information. We live in the greatest technological time in humankind's history. We're interconnected worldwide via an interwoven real-time telecommunications network that brings all of humanity together. The advent of the internet was a genie in the bottle analogy for information sharing and access to information. April 30, 1993, the broader public was able to access the World Wide Web. It was a golden age of information sharing and connectivity and exploration. The genie was let out of the bottle. Yet the governments of the world really didn't pay much attention to it because they still wielded the narrative through their media establishments. Since the 90s, however, traditional media platforms have slowly been dying, withering away as the average person sought out information sources of their own. Now that humanity isn't wholly dependent on the state and its media corporations, they are now trying to shove the genie back in the bottle. For over 30 years, we've all had the freedoms to research information, discuss our findings, and share our thoughts with those who are willing to listen. Now the powers that be want to take that away. So how do we as a society move forward as the freedoms many of us were brought up on and grown up knowing are removed as we speak? And what are those implications for us as Christians? Who would like to start?
I think first and foremost, we should discuss where the internet came from. So if I could, I will.
Please do.
So first and foremost, if folks did not know, our lovely people over at CERN are the ones who gave us the internet. And that's something you can Google. They haven't censored that thus far. Named after this Celtic god of the underworld, an equivalent of Osiris, Cernunnos. So they gave us the internet. We break down the word of internet. Inter, place for tomb or corpse. Net, to hold or restrain something. And I found it very odd that out of all the phrasing that Christ used, come with me and I will make you fishers of men. And it was funny because the other day I'm, doing what we do. It's kind of like a form of ministry. And I was kind of going a little bit venting and I said, God, sometimes I quite literally always feel like I'm working, hanging out in a graveyard, trying my best to help save souls. And I think that's what it is. We honestly are on this side of heaven, trying our best before, you get one last shot. We're going to be that one chance of extending, explaining with context and clarity what the Bible is, what it means for you in all of eternity. And you're constantly being distracted with these little black mirrors. You're constantly being distracted with your browser being open, but your Bible being closed. And I think with the internet, the idea is, yes, this is the chains we're going to use as the bad guys of how we're going to let our kids come back, the fallen angels under the river Euphrates. I highly suspect because the root server for all AI is known as Demon. Enoch states that the kids, the slain Nephilim, giants, when their bodies are slain, they'll roam the earth for 70 generations until the time of the end. So what I suspect the mark of the beast is, and it does connect with going on with the hurricanes, it's the four elements coming together, aka Star of David, Star of Remphan, condemned in Amos 5:26 and Acts 7:43, that they're going to use the internet and the mark of the beast to control everybody. They're going to be energy vessels, parasites essentially, so that can be international demonic possession grid. And this is how they let their kids come back in the last days, and people won't be able to off themselves. So what is the one thing standing in the way for an antichrist system? It's the ecclesia, those who are keeping the word alive, and those who are always kind of, saying, hey, hold up, red flag, that's not right. They're an obstacle keeping the word alive. So when we get to Revelation 18:23, the voice of the groom and the bridesmaid was heard no longer in thee, because you're rich men of the earth, by their pharmakia, big pharma, were all the nations deceived, but it was heard no longer in thee. So in order to be making war against the saints, what is our weapon? Well, let's read Ephesians, right? We're putting on the full armor of God. The word is the weapon, and because we are arbiters, we are people explaining, we are giving context and clarity. That's the thing they have to eliminate, because their kids can't come back until that happens. So I think that's the new way we need to look at internet as a foundational piece, is that they're trying to bring their kids back. And again, I think it's as well in Ephesians chapter 2 that says that Satan has the power and he's the prince over the airwaves, if I'm not mistaken. And you look
Yes,
up a lot of the
yeah.
5G
Yes.
towers, they look just like Baphomet's head. So 5G, penta means 5G, God ram, goat ram.
It's wild that it's, say, the infancy of the internet when everything was hardwired via landlines, and to an extent we didn't have the huge explosion of information sharing as we did until technology kind of progressed over the 90s and the early thousands. That the real bubble burst for the wild west of internet sharing was as soon as we started to see wireless communications come in. And I find it far too coincidental that wireless internet Wi-Fi was invented by an Australian radio astronomer named John O'Sullivan at the CSIRO, like our National Science Research Institute. He created Wi-Fi and didn't want to actually patent it or make any money of it, just gave it to the world for free. Doesn't that seem like it's almost the Trojan horse, or handing out a basket of lovely apples, but those apples are tainted?
I want to know if he woke up from surfing and it was written on his car. I mean, if you know anything about Carrie Mullis, you had a laugh. But no, really. These things are like literally handed down from somewhere else. So
They
And
give it
just to
to us
tie,
for free so that we don't understand the grand finale of what is like, yeah, you can get in the van, but I'd be warning you twice about getting in said van.
and I was just tying that back to what you'd said, Brandon, that the idea that the internet could be used as a mechanism to rehome these ethereal spirits that have been wandering the earth since their physical bodies were destroyed in a landline connected system of the infancy of the internet, where it was dial up. You know how everyone used to turn on their computer and the phone would be off and you'd hear like Chewbacca in the background going, that wasn't technologically advanced enough. They needed the wireless interconnectivity for that to work. And through wireless, we're starting to see the early basis of, say, transhumanism via technology start to make its way into the world. We're hearing about ideas of really great technology that's helped people, say, learn, have the ability to hear. So the cochlear implant helps people listen, helps the deaf hear the world around. Fantastic technology. But those very great ideas are being twisted and turned into things like Neuralink. And Neuralink, on its preface, sounds like a great thing that could give people the ability to walk, people who may be paralyzed. But it also gives it a mechanism, potentially and theoretically, a system in which something could be downloaded into it. And if you're thinking along the, say, the biblical and conspiracy lines of there are these spiritless, bodiless entities floating around all of us at all the time, that they could find a physical manifestation in us via technology.
I think too, it's always been a double-edged sword, man, because all these ideas, they start off with something beneficial, but inevitably it just turns into something really wicked or being used as a tool for wickedness. Just going back to this whole, starting to limit free speech and trying to label things what is hate speech, this and that. It's kind of done under the guise of, oh, it's going to be all right because, we're limiting hate speech. We're limiting people being mean to each other. We're limiting people being bullying each other. But that's a dangerous, dangerous precedence to set because what happens now when let's and this is a long time coming. Eventually there'll be a one world religion, and now what happens when you can't identify as a Christian, you can't have your own beliefs as to follow God, to follow Yahweh, to follow Jesus. And now, if you preaching the gospel incites somebody to anger or hurts their feelings because, well, why are you saying that this person, this guy, Jesus, is any better than, our whatever God, the devil in our one world religion? And now you weaponize the law to shut up a lot of Christians and to stifle the word. And that's the thing I think a lot of people start to kind of overlook is a lot of things start off as, oh, it's for this noble and righteous reason, but there's always that double hand play. There's always that back door into using it as a tool to control people. And more people need to just be aware of that and not be afraid to hear difference of opinion. And society's been molded that way now too, where it's like, just because people are under the impression just because you disagree with them or because you don't, like what they're doing, or you tell them, hey, I don't agree with this, now you suddenly hate them. And that's not life. That's not real life. That's not how it should be anyway. That's becoming real life. But we all need to get back to a time where we can have adult conversations with our adult feelings and control our emotions like adults and just discuss difference of opinion.
And isn't that the catch-22 of the internet in general? The governments of the world and our much learned academics kind of sold us on the idea the internet was a gateway for human knowledge. It was a way to better ourselves. We can talk to each other. We can communicate. We can be interwoven, harmonious society. And as soon as the average person started to look at sources or information that were counter to the narrative, it was oh, shut it down. Quick, we got to shut this down. We've got to do something about this because they're starting to look at things they're not allowed to look at. And we see that in the idea of what governance is. We gloss over the word government all the time. Governmente in the Latin means to control the mind. So government, it must be very hard to control people if they all have their own individual different thoughts all of a sudden. For the most part, 70s through into, say, the early 90s, I'd say 98% of the population was on board with whatever the status quo was, whatever the media corporations were putting out, whatever the government was putting out. Since we've had this internet, this Pandora's box, whether it's good, whether it's bad or indifferent, we've had the ability to look at information through our own lens and use our discernment. And when we share that, we get that 100 monkey effect. It becomes exponential. We start sharing with people, they share with others. And the more that's happened, that snowball of this, governments are losing the control aspect of the mind. We have our own minds now. We're not tapped into the collective consciousness that they want. We have our own, and we're thinking for ourselves. So they're trying really hard to shut this down, and they're doing it through the lens, just like you said, Luca, of misinformation and disinformation. You can't offend people. Your opinion, even though you didn't intend to, could hurt that person's their standing in society. That your intention as a government official, I believe that you were intending to hurt that person's feelings. And we're at a state now where governments are literally proposing and starting to push through bills where they can dictate what your intention was. When intention is purely what your belief is and what you intended to put out, not someone else's interpretation of it. After all, being offended is a choice. Offense is subjective to the person who's hearing it, right?
I think this really goes back to, Ephesians 6:12 about wrestling against flesh and blood and principalities and powers and everything about the rulers of darkness of this world. And when JFK gave that speech, I think he knew a lot. I think he knew something. I think it got him killed, quite frankly. I think that there is so much that they've hidden anyways, because really they only give us 10% of what's really accessible. We all know about the dark web. We all know there's 90% more information out there, which is why they won't shut the internet down, because then we're going to go find even better ways to get on, and then they're screwed. And so as long as they can keep us corralled in where we feel free, right? We feel free here. And I'm not saying people should go get on there or do whatever. Like, you can do what you want, but like anytime, they start taking everything and uploading everything and saying that this is what this is, and let's make all the books go away and let's put it all, on the internet, because they can change anything they want. Then everything is available to them to change at a click of a button. And I think that was the whole goal. And all of this is fallen angel technology. None of this belongs to us, and it always comes with a price. That's just the point of it all. I mean, for me, I don't know. I think that's what he was talking about in that scripture, wrestling with things not of this world is telling us, look, in the end days, you're going to want to die and you won't even be able to die. In the end days, you're going to have all this stuff coming at you, and a lot of people are going to fall for it because they want the next great upload. It's just the truth.
Or
Well,
doesn't
shout
look
it.
that bad.
I hope so. Shout out to Stella Q. I mentioned the topic of this show to her, and she mentioned that maybe people will be begging for a Neuralink in the future if these types of laws pass around the world, because how else would you prove your intention if it's not linked up to your subconscious? No, Your Honor, I didn't intend to offend that person because you can see my digital readout from my wavelengths of my brain at 12th of January when that post was made. My intention wasn't to hurt people. My intention was just to share. And they'll go, oh, okay, that's fine. So if we get to a point where people are curtailed in their speech, their beliefs that they need to take something on board to protect themselves, would they do it? Because at the moment, a lot of people are being feel that they have to get out a national ID to access the internet in some countries, a digital ID to protect themselves. But it seems to be doing the complete opposite. You're actually giving away more of your ability to fight back and defend yourself if you're nationalized on a registry because they know exactly who you are.
It'll probably eventually get to a point where, there's going to be two groups of people. I mean, we're basically getting there, so it'll happen. It's just a amount of time. But it's who's going to be with the government, right? Who's going to be part of this grand common hive mind, and who's not. And the who's nots are going to be their enemy. And it's not going to be long before people start to rationalize, like, let's say Christians, right? Because if you really believe Jesus is God manifested in the flesh, right, you're not going to be of this world. You're separated from the world. That's scriptural. God says he calls you out from the world. You are separate. If you hold fast to his teachings and to what you believe in with that, you're not going to have an easy time in the next couple of years, and that's just the fact of the matter, right? So when that eventually it's going to come down to us versus them sort of deal in regards to, who's allowed to live and who's not, and people who are not part of, Christ, the body of Christ, will eventually be able to convince themselves that it's the right thing to do is to get rid of like all the Christian folks, all the people who don't want to be part of that hive mind, because you're basing your system of morality on the government's authority, and that'll happen eventually. Things like that have happened throughout history, and this limiting the free speech and starting to define hate speech is just one small little domino of a line of dominoes that's eventually going to take us to that point. you know, for the folks out there who say, "Oh no, that'll never be me," we always hear the example brought up of like, pretend if you were living in Nazi Germany, would you be the one who tells on Anne Frank? That sort of thing. You don't even have to think that far back. Just look at what happened with COVID when some states were getting real out of control with the mask mandates. You had neighbors calling on neighbors to try to get them arrested and all sorts of things. So many, many people are capable of doing that, right? And there's an interesting book called, I believe it was called The Lucifer Effect, where it kind of talks about that very thing. Like, if you base your morality off of, you know, the conglomerate hive mind of society, you will be swayed in any direction and do things you never thought you would ever do. And that's precisely where it's going with these hate speech laws. You know, it right now it's wrapped in the guise of, oh, don't be racist, that sort of thing. That's the hate speech they want to block out. Not for long. Eventually, it's going to come down to, individualized preference that goes against the narrative is going to be considered hate speech, and
Well,
that's the fact of the reality.
the very things they're trying to protect, they're going to screw themselves in the end, because this is faceless dehumanization. This is
Hmm.
so easy to slip in on the guise of like, oh, it's okay, like Hitler did at the very first,
Hmm.
and the brown
Mhm.
shirts and the whole situation here. Like, and
Hmm.
then all of a sudden, everybody that he didn't like, all these groups that were supposedly going to be helped with this situation didn't get help, and it became a disaster. And
Hmm.
so, I
And
mean, people might
you
want to look at that. Yeah.
you use the perfect word. It's dehumanizing, and that's really what this inevitably is about, is just dehumanizing the divine image of man, because we are made in God's image, right? But if you dehumanize us to the point of that there's no difference between us and an animal, and I've said it before, like if you get into the mindset, if you're that person where you look at your common person or your fellow man as nothing more than a human shaped animal, like some of these, Luciferians do, and these folks who are deep, deep, deep into the Satanism, they look at other people like human shaped animals. That's ripe for genocide and for abuse. You cannot start looking at people, especially because you have difference of opinion about whatever the topic may be, as less than a person, because that's the slippery slope into genocide. And that's just a fact. I mean, if you look at any group in history that's ever been on the receiving end of genocidal, culture, what have you, it's always starts with that. And again, I know we bring up the example a lot because it's the most well known, right? Nazi Germany, you know, they were able to convince people that Jewish people were savages, were just animals. And that it happens. It happens if you allow yourself to be dictated by the powers to be, and if you don't hold fast to the morality of God. So,
And this is the physical
Well,
side
yeah.
of this spiritual war that Heidi's kind of was alluding to earlier on, that we've got the spiritual war and we've got the technology and all these things happening with transhumanism that are kind of speeding up very, very fast and accelerating. But we've had this historical precedence of, say, unjust laws or freedom depriving laws that may be instituted by one government but aren't truly wielded as a weapon against this population until another person gets in. We see that with communism. Communism was all about, say, the working class man, the artisan, the people who are downtrodden. They were going to uplift the country. Well, who were the first people lined up against a wall when communism finally took over? It was the useless people, the artists, the people who couldn't actually contribute, the people that did all the legwork for them, but ultimately slit their own throats. And we see that just on, say, the human real world political side of things. A government that brings in legislation or laws that hamper your free speech and ability to express yourself may not be used for nefarious purposes now, but if it's set up in the system, it can be used by an opposition party later on. So if you're a person who thinks that these types of misinformation and disinformation laws, hate speech laws are great, you won't be thinking that way if, say, an extremely authoritarian right-wing government gets in and starts doing some things from Weimar Republic that we saw. Like the Nazi takeover was essentially that. It can be wielded by any
Well,
political persuasion, and that's just focusing on the human aspect of this. If you take on board the broader implications of a spiritual war, it really stands out as to why they're trying to separate us into different warring groups on ideology so they can push these things through.
even if you don't like anything to do with Christ, you can look at what happens to their economic flow, period, when this happens. If you like your life, you might want to look at that,
Mhm.
because it crashes everything, right? Like, this is a serious situation. Like, this is on a teetering of a brink of destruction, and then they win because that's all they've ever done. They're trying to do that. I keep telling my mom this because she's like, well, they're ruining everything. I'm like, right. Yes, they are. Yes. And she doesn't fully comprehend that because she thinks, differently. She was raised differently. Like, America was great and this and that. And I know you're not in America, but I'm just saying, as an example, that older generation still holds true to that, and that is not the case anymore.
Can I
It's just
tap onto
not.
that, Heidi? You just mentioned the older generation, which I would assume is the boomer generation for most part. They are the most hoodwinked generation I've ever seen, and I don't say that in a disparaging way. They grew up in a time where patriotism, loving your country, it was just the thing that they grew up in. It was their environment. They're a product of their generation. And what I'm seeing in my country at the moment is there's the boomer generation and politicians who have tapped into their collective anger over social media. And they're pointing out how kids of this generation, they're being warped, they're being subject to school place bullying, there's suicides that occur. All the dark, shady recesses of the internet are on full display now, and it's being weaponized by the government. So the government points out the problem, gets the boomer generation to get up, angry and fired up about it. Then they offer the solution. Well, the only way to protect children from the internet and social media is to have a law that requires anyone under the age of 16 to be banned from those platforms. They can't access it. Okay, great. But how can we possibly stop kids from accessing the internet? Here's how it works. That really good digital ID bill that we passed, the digital ID law, it's no longer going to be an opt-in situation. Everyone has to have a digital ID so they can verify their age. Once your ID is verified and your age is verified, they can't access the internet then. That's how we do it. It's that incrementalism of small little steps, small puzzle pieces, which form a broader picture of the real attack that's going on with our ability to express ourselves and share information online.
I
Well,
think
that's just
to
going to
tap on,
erode trust. Yeah. Yeah.
I think to tap on what Luca was saying. You guys familiar with Operation Blackout? It was a groundworks movement where they were saying, okay, if a celebrity's not going to talk about what's going on right now in Gaza, then we're just going to block them. McDonald's, or you're supporting them, we're going to block you. And so this was starting to happen in Massey. And you know what Meta started doing? They reversed the blocks. Why? Because your stars of Hollywood, this is how right now, this is their beachhead, as we said before, California. This is how they speak, is through their avatars, like Venom. Think of it. We're from another place, but this is how we speak, is through you guys. They are not having a voice now because people are blocking them out. So what are they going? They're going to the people that are controlling the internet saying, you got to reverse that right now. I want them to see my advertisements. I want them to see, because if we take that away, suddenly they start losing their power because they're speaking through their avatars. It's just like, yeah, we always saying put your faith in Christ, but it's like, do you understand how much faith he puts in us? There's a reason why he gave the parable of the servant with the talents, and you're not using it. You guys have got to use it. So, anyways, I think that's something interesting, and I think what they're going to do, possibly, is mess around with the election. Because remember the 5th of November. I find that ironic. But, and again, it would be temporary because they want to get the internet immediately back up as soon as possible. So probably about 6 to 8 weeks. But this would fulfill what they said about the World Economic Forum. There'll be an international power outage. This will get their attention.
Cyber
So
polygon you're referring to?
yes, yes. And I think what would occur off of that would be similar to what happened in 9/11. Within 3 days, they passed the Patriot Act. It's like, well, thanks. And they already had that prepped in the wings for several months in advance. So what would occur with this? They already want to have kind of what you're implying right now, Drew. By 2027, you have to essentially use your social security in order to log in online, and or equivalent thereof, something like that. You have to have a digital ID in order to access the internet. And I'm over here going, won't be able to buy or sell unless you, that is literally 90% of how people do business these days. And that's only a hop, skip, and a jump between, well, why don't we just add that to your credit card? It's just like an Amazon this. It's a benefit. It's a bonus part of the package. And that's what they've gotten a lot of the modern world in, is that even with salvation, it's a package plan of salvation. Rapture gets me out before it gets really bad, so I don't have to do anything. That's literally how most people are viewing their lives. So when we're telling them and warning them, going, no, we have to be sober, we have to be vigilant, we have to point out the things that are going on. And it's like, why would you want to tar and feather little boy Blue when he's warning you about a real thing that's coming in real time? And they're pointing to the Bible as the main resource. You know what I'm saying?
They
They want to
they
censor
already
free
do.
speech, but they want to ignore the
They,
word while doing it.
they already have implemented this 100% because I work with the military people and they have to have a special card to get on the internet. You guys, this is already done.
Oh shoot.
This is done.
Oh
Yeah,
shoot.
it exists in multiple forms across the entire planet, mostly in the Western world. You could look at, say, the Chinese system as the extreme of what they want. There's the Great Firewall of China in which you can't access certain information, depending on what the government wants you to look at. But like you said, Heidi, anyone who works for, say, federal governments
They're
or
comm
militaries,
cards. They're
they'll
called
have,
comm
yeah,
cards.
yeah,
Mhm.
they'll have cards which they need to access. You look at countries
Communist
like
cards.
Venezuela and other Latin American countries which have, say, totally gone against the disinformation, misinformation propaganda. You can't even use VPNs. Using a
Mhm.
VPN is deemed illegal. And I often laugh because the biggest so-called free speech platform left is X, formerly known as Twitter, and Elon makes himself out to be this great savior. But what's one of the first thing he institutes is a blue check mark, where you have to pay for the ability to express yourself more. Everyone else has a limited amount that they can put on a page. Everyone else can just upload videos. They can put up multiple links of information. But if you're a pauper, you've just got maybe 26 words you can get into a single post. So that
If
that
any,
was like the softening effect. If you're willing to pay for a blue check mark, you'll be willing to voluntarily go out and get digital ID. Especially if in a situation like you said, Brandon, your livelihood's dependent on it. You can barely
Well,
go in to get a driver's license or work with your bank without having some kind of a digital presence. Imagine if they take away physical money. What happens if we go cashless? Then you don't have a choice. Everyone will have all that information on their phone, carrying it with you at all times. It may not be an internalized system yet, but we're a quasi Android at that point because everything we need to engage in society is within a device, and we can't do it on our own at that point.
I mean, they're already
It's
doing that at Costco. As from what happened here, I mean, I don't have a Costco card, but they're over here like starting to make it where it's getting to a digital point, and I'm like, that's not scary at all. I mean, that's your food. That's stuff you bring in for supplies. Like, what are you telling? Like, I have to have now a digital presence. I can't just. It's like we're creeping closer and closer to it, but folks aren't seeing it because they see technology as convenience. Whereas a
it's
lot of us are over here going, no, we're fighting on the devil's playground. We're going to the home base of where because somebody was saying, well, why are you streaming then? Aren't you hypocritical if you're going on the internet and you say it's the? I'm like, no, I'm going to their home play base where they play off their games, and I know their playbook. That's what I'm trying to do as long as we can, until we can't do that no more. It's like your pulpits aren't giving it to you. I'm sorry, a lot of people are getting it more from podcasts. That's the reason why they'd have to censor.
if people so I'm sure there's some listeners out there who think it's all crazy dystopian sci-fi mumbo jumbo. But if you look at China and like their social credit score system and how that works, that is coming here to the US. It's just a matter of time. And for folks who are not aware of what that is, that's basically what Brandon was alluding to, where a credit score is intertwined with speech, right? In the form of if you speak about the government in a bad way, or if you speak with people, or I'm sorry, not speak with people, but if you interact with people who the government deems as,
Problematic.
problematic, yeah, that's a good word for it, your actual social credit score goes down. So where instead of like a regular credit score where it's financial with money, now this is social with people you interact with. And if your social credit score is too low, you can't get into certain areas of a city, you can't go to certain places, you might not even be able to access your bank account. That is real life in China, and it is coming to the US if we keep perpetuating this, hate speech stuff and using proper, labels for what people want to be called. That's all great in your own home, but this is not how the real world works. All right. The real world, we need to keep it rational. We need to keep it based on facts, truth, and reality. As a good buddy of mine at work says, we work with facts and reality, and that's what we have to do here. We just have to live in the factual real world. But unfortunately, too many people are comfortable with instituting this false reality around themselves, and the truth is being stifled. And we can do our best to preach, to teach, but a lot of people will just never accept what is coming down the pipeline until it's too late. And even then they might not believe it. And going back to what you were saying, Brandon, I would argue it's not that so many people don't see it, it's rather so many people are scared to acknowledge that it's happening or just don't.
Subconsciously,
Or
yeah, yeah.
yeah, or they agree with it. You know, a lot of
Yeah.
people, and we've talked about this a bunch on the various podcasts. You know, a lot of people identify themselves with the conglomerate hive mind, right? Like they make they make their god government,
Yes.
and so they it is infallible to them, and that's really, you're battling ideologies.
You're
So,
making God in your own image, and I think that's why First Samuel is
mhm,
so important, because he's always said, "I don't need a king over my people. They're out of all the nations, they got direct
mhm,
access to the source, to the number one, and they still want to put a substitute in between that, whether it's an idol, whether it's a politician, whether it's a religious leader, fill in blank. That is Antichrist is substitute, and that's what a lot of people I think are not acknowledging, because they're expecting Antichrist to be evil incarnate, and it's like no,
mhm,
the whole culture. If you want to say Antichrist is the mark of the beast, whatever, fill in blank. But who's the proponents moving this forward? If you want to say the two false prophets, let's go just with that. Who's promoting this within our culture and society? And again, you were saying that like they're going to go after Christians. I think partially because Christian nationalism, that's fine. If you're a pro Zion, that's fine. What the problem's going to be if you start disagreeing with the official narrative, the full,
mhm.
like everybody else is going with this fast speed train, but you're over here going on those little crank carts that they got for the traction. Like, no, I'm against all y'all's. That's going to be the problem, and they want to get you off the tracks because
Mhm,
that's haltering the rest of the sleeping bridesmaids. Because that's one of Satan's favorites. It's not necessarily going after the sinner; it's going after the inactive saint that doesn't understand what's going on.
mhm,
That's what's terrifying, because a sleeping bridesmaid is what makes the non-Christians cynical. They're the ones that they scoff at. They're the ones that aren't doing anything, and they make us look bad. But that's what they're going to capitalize on, because that's what brings us back to the Whore of Babylon mentality. Is like, oh, we all love each other. That's what Christianity is all about. We're sorry. We're sorry. No, we're supposed to be set apart and calling out things, because every time
mhm.
Christ made a cameo in a temple, he caused a problem. Look at most of his followers and prophets. They caused problems. And I think that's what a lot of Christians, they are afraid to stand up, because we've given like Diet Coke Catholicism. We give all the responsibilities and put it on the pastor, that we ourselves have become cubicle Christianity. We just sit in our pews and that's it. And then we look at the world like, oh, that's weird. Oh, look, cool new video game.
It's the
I
size.
think that,
Sorry,
oh,
Heidi, go for it.
sorry. Oh, I was just going to say a quote that I love, and this is by Nikita Khrushchev, I think is how you say it, but it says, "You Americans are so gullible. No, you won't accept communism outright, but we'll be feeding it to you in small doses of socialism until you finally wake up and find you've already had communism. We won't have to fight you. We'll so weaken your economy until you fall like overripe fruit into our hands."
So true. And
That's all.
Censored, Heidi. I already know that's fact checked.
in the political spectrum of ideas, as soon as, say, social discourse started to occur online, we saw that huge push from people who would identify as socialists or left-leaning. They ran with the idea of doxing and cancel culture. So it began with maybe people screenshotting one of your posts or something you've said online, and they'd actively contact your employer, find out you are, and get you fired, right? That type of
Mm,
implication. That's one small thing. But imagine if your identity has to be out in the open, no more anonymous accounts. You are who you are online. That is connected to your employer, everything you do through, say, a government app. What if things are just naturally flagged? Like you put a post up, I disagree with the government's current policy on, say, immigration. Bing,
mm,
your flag, that's sent to your employer. Why are you a hateful bigot who doesn't want to help third world people who need support? Well, hey, I'm all for supporting people, but I don't like 500,000 people walking across the border each day. So, yeah, call me
mm,
crazy. This is the type of world we're going to move into. And because that implication is there, they have absolutely scared the ever living shit out of the average person to express their mind, whether that's politically, theologically, or otherwise. People are just being kind to get along. And sometimes uncomfortable conversations do have to happen for the betterment of mankind. And if we're in a point now where fear drives us in what we will and won't do, that's a terrible state for humanity to be in. Because how are we ever going to ever speak the word as Christians, let alone the truth, or criticize bad policies as we see them happening?
mm.
I
That's
think this
ultimate.
goes back to the churches too, right? Like I mean, people have been taught what in school, what in church, sit down, be quiet, be good, don't do this,
Mm-hmm.
especially girls, for frick's sake. Try and be
Mm.
a woman and be speaking your mind. You're just a
She's a
bitch.
witch
That's what
burner.
that is. Yeah,
Burn the
exactly.
witch.
And I mean that's the truth. And especially living in Utah, like, my son said today they were at some place eating and these kids were going crazy, chucking food everywhere at the waiter and at my son. And he went over to the parents. He's only 16. And he's like, yo, check your kids, man. Like he said it nice, but he was like, I'm sorry, but your children keep chucking food at us. And his stepmom was horrified. He's like, but she was mad the whole time and she complained the whole time, but she didn't want to do anything because she didn't want to seem rude. And I'm like, way to go, son. I just
Mm.
I'm like, you said it nice, right? You said it nice. But this is basically what we're living in, like in real life. That's like a small example, right?
Well, they've applied that
Nobody
old
wants to hurt
adage.
anyone.
They've
Yeah.
applied that old adage of we don't talk politics or religion at the dinner table. They've now applied that to general society. You can't go out into general public or workplace anywhere and have any kind of discussions whatsoever that might make people uncomfortable, make them question things, or just even start a well-meaning conversation. People can have completely different ideas on any given subject and have a respectful conversation. Somehow, we've been sold the idea that that's not possible because someone is going to be offended or someone is going to get upset, or you can't say that because that's not polite in a polite society. We've been shoehorned, we've been domesticated, should be more the word. We've been psychologically and orally domesticated to the point where we
I
can't
agree.
speak really what's on our mind. Could you imagine
That's
if the
why,
fathers
yeah.
of the early church had this mentality? The Bible would never have been written. Those books would never have been brought together. And who knows what the world would be like. But in the modern day, this is where, Brandon, you've used this term before, modern day pulpits. The church has evolved in such a way that we have multiple denominations, thousands were spoilt for choice on this. The common man can choose his own path. He can research the word, use his discernment to find his way to God. But denominational and non denominational alike, we're in an age now because of technology where we can research things further. We don't have to rely on the guy at the podium, the dude wearing a dress, talking down to us with his interpretations of the institution of a church. We can do that on our own. We can let God speak to us through his words. And that is a dangerous, dangerous place for the establishment to find Christianity to be in because we're getting closer to God's words than ever before. I think truly this is the best time to be a Christian. Ironically, it's probably the worst time to be a human being with the things that are going on. But I see it as a silver lining. It's the best time to be a Christian because we have everything at our disposal and we can share and communicate with one another. So, can you just delve into this idea, Brandon, of what a modern pulpit is?
I think a modern pulpit has been heavily wussified, is the best way to define it. When they, well, when they gave us the Schofield Bible, the friendly Zionist translation of the world, what does that make us do? It focuses on a physical Israel, focuses on a physical ethnicity, and suddenly the spiritual aspect of the ecclesia, it just there's no oomph. It's like, no, they're still special. No, Christ fulfilled it. That there's neither racial barriers, male, female, bond or slave, because now everybody has access to come to this. Secondly, they infiltrated our seminaries, and this is a book, and again, it was a Catholic author, but that guy was very well researched. I wish he'd hit from the Catholic perspective, but otherwise, he was talking about how in the 1920s they were already infiltrating a lot of our seminaries. So by the time we get 100 years later to like right now, we already have subtle little things like Jesus was a communist, or it's just a little bit tainted, like voting. I just did a Google thing, just like what's 10 verses? Give me 10 verses about where it says voting in the Bible. The verses I'm reading, I'm like, that is totally non-contextual. But what does the pulpit tell us? Oh, it's our good Christian duty to focus on this. We need to go pray for them because this is equivalent of our 9/11 and stuff like. So I think what's happened to the pulpit is that we've put so much emphasis in making them kind of like a priest. The only thing we got rid of were the statues in the confessional booth, but everybody else still treats him like he's the holy guy in the room. You have to use his title. You have to, and that has heavily diluted the ramifications of what the ecclesia is supposed to do of taking personal responsibility and doing one-on-one discipleship. There is none of that for the most part. Oh, we went to a rally. Again, what did you do during the week? Are you helping your kid actually understand the context of the Bible? When they're going out into school, are you giving them something to think about before they go over there? So, like, I think that's honestly what's happened is that what they've done to our seminaries is that they've taken out the head from what we were all relying on. Like, oh, the bad guy wouldn't lie to us. So now when we get to the passage in scripture in the last days, there will be, you know, false prophets, people who are seeking ear ticklers. People are now defending the man as opposed to defending the word. And that is honestly what our culture is having a ramification outside of the parishioners within the congregation. They're now doing this within society. And I think that is inverting, going right back to the horror of Babylon mindset and mentality, is that it's inverted of, oh, a religious man needs to be interceding just like the Pope. It's the same thing. It's just a little bit doctored. And that was, I have a show right now that's premiering, and One Nation Under Satan, and it's talking about how the Jesuits literally created America for this reason, to bring back the Protestant dissidents, to make them come back to the church. That was literally why we were created. Maryland was named after the Virgin Mary. I mean, there's this thing after thing after thing where you're going, so Helios east to west, are you bringing back the scattered children to come back to the? I think that's
Zion's
what's
in
on
Utah, so they're
Zion's
gonna
in
bring
Utah.
Zion from Utah. Yeah, yep, that's real.
Great.
Yeah. There's a whole canyon named Zion National Park. Yeah. Mhm. This is what I'm saying, and they've applied it to everything. You're not incorrect. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
This is
I think
somewhat off topic, but it's been ringing my brain the whole time you've been talking about this, Brandon. You mentioned plenty of times in your content how we as the Gentiles were grafted into the tree. No one really looks at the idea of what grafting means within, say, the plant-based world, and how it actually applies very well to the grafting in of Gentiles to the faith. Advantages of using grafted plants include better resistance to pathogens, droughts, and other environmental stresses, more vigorous growths, and higher yields. These advantages also allow for fewer inputs, such as pesticides and applications, and extended harvest seasons. If we look at what's happened, say, to the idea of the faith since Gentiles were grafted in, that was an explosion of faith. Humanity has been brought in. Look at the growth within Christianity. And I think this somewhat applies to the non-denominational or Christians who are open to using technology and the internet to listen to and spread their word. It's been a massive explosion. We are less prone to the pathogens of, say, organized religion, which is most likely co-opted and used to control us. The pathogens of government that try and suppress our speech. We as new Christians, and I hate to use new because it's connotation of new age, but modern day Christians, with all the advantages at our disposal, we're using the enemy's weapons against them. We are in the best place to keep the word growing, and we see that because we are grafted in. We are stronger. We are more versatile than Christians of the past. What are your thoughts about that?
Drew, I think you just hit the nail on the head with my other theory of that potentially the real ecclesia in Scripture is the two witnesses in the last days. And people aren't seeing it, they're not wanting to see it, but what is it? They're actually hating the truth that's being spread internationally in a perspective and way that they do not have control on. So what is the last, in order to get rid of their empire, because they want the empire, the golden age of Babylon, if you're looking at the statue of Nebuchadnezzar, and they want the empire of iron and clay, man mixing with machines, you have to cut off the feet, essentially, of the ecclesia, the spiritual feet, if you will. And once we come tumbling down, they think that they will ascend. But I think you hit the nail on the head. Yes, that is part of the reason why it's terrifying, because while they did COVID, what did that do? They created whack-a-mole. Thousands of people started doing podcasts saying, you know what? I'm not seeing it in my church. I'm gone. And I saw a meme that was perfect for this. It says, everyone's worried that the church is emptying out. It says, no, it's been deployed. I'm like, yes, because people are saying the same for me. What do you mean you're putting caution tape between pews? What do you mean that we're afraid to talk about what's going on? I have relatives that are dying and you're not saying anything from the pulpit? I'm sorry, this is not meeting what I need spiritually. I need to know how I'm supposed to go to war against this for a lot of people. The other ones are just going, nothing's changed. What are you talking about? I think you hit the nail on the head. And I think that also ties in what you get with Joel and the prophecy in the New Testament, that in the last days, the young people and the old men will dream visions and dreams and seek the true interpretation of Scripture. That's kind of what I see a lot of these shows, is that even if we don't know the answer, we're at least bouncing ideas off of each other. And that's part of the reason why you would have to censor people like us, because we're getting the people to start thinking and looking into things again, as opposed to just going on with the routine and becoming a real live NPC Sims character.
Yes, this breaks through. This breaks through because my mom is part of those boomers you talk about. And like for me to have this breakthrough for her, I'll tell her something and then she didn't get it, right? Like she'll go back and forth. She'll be like, "Oh, I watched Brandon and I watched this person." And then she'll be like, "Wait a minute, that can't be right. That can't be right." Like they get scared and then it resets their brain. And then like today she's way awake now. And today she's like, "Oh, we're reading this thing about what immunizations we should get, like, because we're
Mm.
old." And I'm like, none of them. Put that away. What are we doing? They just want your social security money. And she's like, well,
Yes.
I was just asking questions. And I'm like, just leave it alone. Like,
Yes.
stop. Like,
Yes.
please. Yeah. And sometimes she'll slip back that way. And I'm like, wait a minute, you already know all this. You watch so many people that I watch, like, and talk to. And sometimes though, she still goes backward because they do have that programming. It's like I honestly believe it's like MK Ultra. Something happened in there. I don't know. I don't know.
Mm.
It's
But
just hard
yeah,
for
from
some
that era.
people. It's just hard because it's like, and I like, it kind of all seems almost fantastical, when you think about it. But if
My
somebody doesn't
mom's just a
already,
good person. Yeah, she just doesn't want to believe that. You know what I
well,
mean?
yeah, yeah, exactly, and that's one of a few reasons for sure, because but what I try to bring up with people is if you look at what's going on today, it 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 is truly a battle between good and evil. Like it's like some stuff now is so egregious, especially like the whole, and I don't want to get too far off topic, Drew, but like, the gender affirming care for children, that's insane. It's different if you're an adult, like you can make that decision. There was a hilarious video. I can't remember who, like if it was a famous actor or whatever. The point is, not my video. It was hilarious, but it's a guy and he has his kid, and the girl is like 5 or 6 years old, right? And the guy asks like, "Oh, should kids be able to pick their gender? Let's find out." And then he has his kid on the other end of the table, and he's like, "Hey, little Sally, I have in this pile," and he like pushes like a pile of money. It's like 10, he's like, "I have $10,000 here. Or you can have this piece of chocolate cake." And of course, what's the kid pick? She picks the cake. And he's like, he just looks at the camera, and I think the video ends. Because the point being, like, a child, right, doesn't have the wherewithal to understand that life altering decision. And so to put that onus on children that's just insanity. And that's
Mm.
gonna piss some people off. Maybe not on this podcast, because I don't think anybody who believes in you know allowing a child to undergo a radical surgery that's gonna forever alter the course of their life, I don't think that person's listening here. They might be. If you're offended, I'm sorry, but not really. I mean, that's insanity. But you look at that, right?
The choice
And
to
how
be
can you
offended.
not? Yeah, exactly. It's a choice to be offended. Thank you, Drew. But like, you look at something like that, imagine trying to explain that to somebody like from Heidi's folks' time, like the boomer. They'd look at you, they'd probably stick you in a mental institution. I mean, honestly. But
Yeah.
now we tolerate it, and it's all in this name of tolerance, right? And
Mm.
tolerance, it can be bad, and it can be weaponized, and it is being weaponized. You should not be
Yes.
tolerant about people advocating for children to have these life-altering surgeries, of which it's a money pit for doctors. Any doctor
Oh,
who
yeah.
advocates for that, it should have his medical license revoked. because they are going to be a lifelong patient for that doctor, right? My point in all
There
this
is
is,
horrific things that can happen with to
oh,
your
of
point
course,
there. That
of
yeah,
course,
it's
Luca,
and part.
the very word, before you keep going, the very
Mhm,
word they use is tolerance. Tolerance isn't even the right word they should be using. If it's really about acceptance, use the
mhm,
word acceptance, because tolerance, by its very definition, means you're just putting up with it and you don't agree with it. Or you may
mhm,
not like it and you're just putting up with it.
of
So
course.
they're being very open about it. They know probably the majority disapprove of it, but you just have to tolerate it. It's not your choice.
Mhm,
You just have to tolerate it. Well, it's not really
exactly.
about the person going through whatever the changes they think they should be going through. It's not about accepting them as a human being and an individual. It's about making you tolerate something you know fundamentally is wrong.
Hmm. And it's just it's pure evil, man. I mean, it really is. Like, there's really no other way to explain it. And I mean, I like there's just not. It's like this next movement just up on the horizons, on the heels of that, about like sexualizing kids. And that's one of the, I can't remember, and Brandon probably knows, one of the agendas for I want to say it was for WEF. Yeah, about revoking the age of consent. Like, exactly. That's real life. And to like, how do you even conceptualize that? Like, how do you even explain that to somebody? Like, that's almost disbelief, but that's real life. That is happening, all in the name of
Sure.
tolerance.
And
And
Yeah.
go ahead,
this
go
is
ahead.
where my frustration takes over, because if the institutions of the church, and Brandon gave a great analogy before about COVID, how the churches really didn't push back, it might have been
Mm-hmm.
small little community groups or small, tiny, localized churches that fought back. In Australia, we had quite a few that were arrested for openly praying out in public during the mask mandates. They did a great job, but they were weaponized and given the term fundamentalist Christians. What's wrong with being a fundamentalist? Fundamentally, I believe in the word and I believe in God's promise to us
Mm-hmm.
and humanity, and we have a role to play in that. That shouldn't be weaponized in such a way. And to see all these insanely horrible things that common sense and logic and would dictate are wrong on so many levels, for the institutions who are there and supposed to be the representatives for us, for God on earth, not doing anything about it, just towing the line, you can see where the allegiances truly lie.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why
Well,
people like us are being branded as conspiracy theorists and
mm-hmm.
fundamentalist Christians. They're trying to make our faith be dirty, bad, and wrong, while at the same
Mm-hmm.
time allowing the corporations, the groups of the bigger entities of faith, just go as normal.
Oh yeah, to run amok. And it
Mm.
and there's nothing wrong with being a fundamentalist Christian. I mean, that's just a label that they create to separate, folks who they do religion for therapeutic reasons versus people who actually believe, right? Like,
Right.
I think it's fair to say everybody on this panel actually believes. So it's not fundamental Christianity, it's Christianity. You either do or you don't. You know what I mean? Like, there really is no alternate Christian. It is or it isn't. But all
Mm.
these labels are just, done to again separate people and to cut out the real Christians. Like, things are going to
Yes.
get hard. It's not going to be easy, but it's to cut out those real Christians. It's to separate them from society.
Wheat and tares. Wheat and tares.
Exactly. Thank you. No, you're 100% correct. It's the parables of the wheat and the tares. And that's just the sad fact of reality. Like, it's going to get worse and it's going to get tough, and it's something like we all have to really like mentally prepare ourselves for, because it's not going to get easy. But then it comes back to, are you trying to you want to please man or do you want to please God? And that's why it's
Right.
important to have such a, just either believe or don't believe is my thing, right? Like, don't dabble in it. If it's not, it is for you or it's not for you. Because if you dabble in, let's say, Christianity, and you're just, oh, it's for therapy reason, not only are you going to miss the entire point, but you're doing yourself an injustice, and you're doing an injustice to other people around you. And that's just a hard fact of the reality. So you're either for Jesus 100% or you're not. And that's not to say, like, you're perfect, but your core belief. Do you ultimately believe there is something beyond this physical realm? Is there a spiritual realm? Is there something beyond this material world? And if your answer is yes, I think that is really where you start getting anchored into Christ. Because if you really think like, and I'm sorry, I promise you all the time, I'm not going to go down these wild rants, but here I'm spiraling. I'm going to finish it off here in a second. My point in saying all this, right, is if you don't believe that there's anything beyond this world, you are going to have that yoke of the of oppressive control set on your neck and think that that's the only way. Or you can give yourself to Christ and be free of it. And that's why he says the truth will set you free. Jesus is the truth, the way, and the life. That's what it says in the gospel. Because how can you control people who believe that there is something beyond just this physical world? Right? I mean that's how I see it. And please feel free to humble me. I appreciate different perspectives. But and this is why Christianity, or fundamentalist Christianity, as people want to label it, is such a threat to the collective hive mind. Because how do you control people who are putting Christ's yoke on them, right? Because Christ said in the book of Matthew, carry my yoke because my burden is light. And it
Mm.
is. Imagine having to wear the yoke of the world, especially with all these crazy laws coming down the pipeline and all this oppressiveness. And some people keep their eyes closed and their head down and don't think it's oppression, but it is. And for a lot of people, by the time they realize, it's going to be too late. So
Isn't it
Sleeping
wild,
practice.
though, that the attack on Christianity purely seems to be happening across Western nations?
Mm.
And need to look no closer than to say that the Anglosphere, so Britain, the Commonwealth, America, all of these were, for lack of a better word, meant to be founded on, say, Christian ideals. Heck, the British flag, the Union Jack, that is the combination of three different saints' crosses. Saint Andrew, Saint George, all of these saints from our history of the church are there on display on our flags, yet in our own countries, preaching the word could be misconstrued by someone or taken the wrong way as being hate speech and driven in such a way that you could be held liable under certain laws. Yet, if you were to go out and preach any other religion or any other faith, I know quite a few passages from the Talmud are pretty spicy. Some of the passages from to the Quran could be quite problematic. Yet, they are not given the same kind of loaded
Scrutiny.
terms like Christianity does. Sure, we do see it in aspects of Islam with fundamentalist Islam, where they conflate anyone as a Muslim being a terrorist, but the levels of being able to practice your faith without persecution, Christianity really seems to be the point of that joke for these people. They know where the true power lies, and they're putting everything they possibly can to stifle the spreading of the word and sharing. And I'm seeing it more and more in everyday practice in Western nations, and people are taking it for granted. We've got the boomer generation. I don't want to harp on like I'm labeling them as the problem, but they grew up with a lot of great fundamental cultural practices, and they've kind of just ignored what's going on with the rise of what you could claim to be wokeism or socialism or the left. They're too busy arguing about their retirements or why their grandkids are doing too many TikToks. Well, let's find out where the true problem is. There's a spiritual war going on, and you forgot about it because you grew up in the golden economy of the boomer generation. Like you worked hard. Don't get me wrong, you worked hard and you built generational wealth and you did everything that was right for your children, but you dropped the ball when it came to the spiritual war. Times were so abundant, it's like you lost focus on what's truly important.
Well, that was the
Very true.
point, right? And plus, it's hard to scare a bunch of fundamentalist Christians that are like, "Oh, you want to cut my head off? I hope the knife is sharp." Like that's kind of hard to, they're pissed off. They're pissed off at us because we're like, "Oh, go ahead." Like,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah. And so what are they going to do with us? That's why they're mad.
Mm.
So,
make us look
Uh,
crazy so people hate us, I guess.
well, that's
Yeah,
what they're
they
doing with
hate
optics
the
us
is what
because
it's
Stones
they
and
about.
ain't
boys.
us. No, just kidding. I'm
Um,
stupid. Sorry.
I think what Luca was implying, just to tie a little bit more into that, and also what's been going on around the world in general, is that when we're, like I said prior to the show, when we were overhearing why do you not do that? Well, that's Satanism, that's paganism. It's like we never break down and dissect what is it they believe. Why did they feel the necessity of sacrificing their firstborn kid? Abraham was about to do it. Why? Because God was about to do a compare contrast. Are you as radical as these crazy people around in the world that are doing this practice? I'm just testing. I don't want you to actually go through with it. I will provide the substitute, but I'm just curious. Are you that radical after all this time of waiting? Would you be willing to go to that length for me? So I think biggest thing to break down for folks, when you're talking about paganism, first, it's breaking down yourself so that you can ascend. They have a similar thing, reborn, rebirth, but you have to understand the counterfeit. It's finding that inner light within you, not pointing to the light that's up there. That's Christ. That's, the word made flesh. That's how you understand the world. That's how my word is a lamp unto my feet. We understand this differently. But when you're hearing the phrase as above, so below, and it goes so without as the universe, so the soul. Here's the thing. We just say Baphomet Satan. It's like, no, that actually goes to the Trihermes. That's an equivalent of the occult Messiah figure, Christ pagan doppelganger, Nimrod son Tammuz. When you combine all of his symbols, and if you're not too sure what to look up the Star of David, or you look up the elements of fire, air, water, and earth. When you put all those together, that's your Star of David, the thing that I said condemned in Amos 5:26, Acts 7:43. If we're in the last days, here's the thing. When you're reading about the four horsemen of the apocalypse, did you know that they're all mentioned with the thing I just mentioned? Wildfires, right? Created by, okay, be that as it may, let's not go into full on. I'm just saying. Air, they're dropping chemtrails on us. Fire, air, water, fluoride, and all this other crap that they're doing with it. Earthquakes in diverse places. You get fire, air, water, and earth. It's all the four horsemen of the apocalypse. This is what the occult wants. This is their crowning achievement. Corona is at the top of the Hermetic Kabbalah tree of life. Apollyon is at the base, aka Melkut, the second Cyrus. And that guy is known as the champion of Noahide laws, according to Israeli national news. All of this is going on in real time. And because we don't understand what Satanism is or what the counterfeit Christianity is, when people are starting to mingle and they look like they're turning Christian, like, oh, Jordan Peterson, he's wearing a Virgin Mary jacket now every time you see him. And I'm like, dude, when you see Russell Brand, he's now doing baptisms in his tidy whities. There's elements here, folks, where if you understood what counterfeit is, when somebody is calling that out, you should be going, well, I've never heard about that before. But that's the other half within our culture. We don't know what evil is. So how are we supposed to know what we're supposed to condemn? Because we've merged the morals of taking out God's word says to stand by this. God, thus saith the Lord. That's what all the prophets would do. We've taken that out and replaced it with good morals. That's just what the serpent did in the Garden of Eden. Yeah, the word's okay, but do you want to know the difference between good and evil? Yeah, I would. No, we're not supposed to be playing that game. And this is what they're doing with a lot of our culture. So when we're over here now getting the choice with the government telling us this is good, this is evil, we need to get rid of this and this, what are we doing? Are we looking to the word for the answer if what is good and what is evil, or are we listening to what the popular demand is saying of the culture at the time? That's something I'm seeing on the rise right now because we're not standing by the word. We're falling for whatever the world says.
Well, the word itself is becoming illegal in many senses around the world. Look no further than X. I cannot post a quote of scripture around the synagogue of Satan, the words of Christ himself. It will get flagged, it will be taken down, it will be conducted and condemned as hate speech. Now imagine if there's a digital ID associated with this and I quote scripture which someone defines as being offensive towards a particular ethnicity, you could potentially be arrested for this in the future. Christians are on the very cusp of persecution, which we see in scripture. It's coming, and I don't think people quite realize that. And the thing that amazes me is, yes, this is a spiritual war, and there are things that are outside of our control on this physical plane, but there are things we can control and we can push back against. And that's what we're doing on these types of shows. We are talking about it, we are spreading the word, we are raising awareness of what's happening. And without that, we are in a dangerous place to be. So, what's going to happen in, say, 3 to 5 years? I think that 2025 is going to be the culmination of a lot of these things. We're going to see a lot of this pushed into Western countries around the world, starting off with the Commonwealth under that British parliamentary common law that's going to go around. Last step's going to be America because of your First Amendment, but we do have a lot of Democrats over there talking about quashing that and limiting its powers and abilities. So what happens in a world, say the next 3 to 5 years, where digital IDs get put in, misinformation, disinformation policies are put in place, offense laws, all these types of things which curtail our speech or enact, what will happen to the church? What will happen to, say, people like us? The modern day approach to spreading the word. The institutions are going to be fine because they've bought into it. You've got Anglican preachers openly going against scriptural doctrine by putting up transgender flags in their churches and all this type of nonsense. But what happens to people like us, people who've interpreted the word, the so-called fundamentalists? What's the plan for us, do you think?
I'm
Well, I
going to
mean,
go
they
to the
could.
mountains. I'm going to live in my trailer. That's all.
I mean, you could stop
I was
the
immediately hit with the sound of music. Climb
yeah.
Sorry, continue.
You could stop the internet spread at some point, but I mean, how are you gonna? Well, I guess you're just gonna have to nosedive into it all and that's actually a good question, man. And that's something I have personally thought about, and it is not gonna be easy. I mean, you basically have to mentally prepare yourself to let your entire life crash and burn. But I mean, seriously, that's a good question. And like I said, I've thought about that, and it's hard, man, because you just you're the captain of the sinking ship of your life, basically, right?
Well, you're not
And
supposed to love this place, right? This isn't our
yep,
home.
Hmm.
This isn't
of
our home.
course, but it's
For
hard.
us, we know that. Yeah, it is hard, but
Yeah.
like at any moment you have to decide. Like when 2020 hit and I knew that that was real, that that could be a real situation, and it became real to me, like it felt real even
Hmm.
if it didn't get, imposed like that, but
Hmm.
I was ready. Like I didn't give a crap anymore
Atta
about
girl.
any of this stuff.
Yeah.
You just got to be ready. All I think
Yep.
about now is like, man, I hope they're not poisoning water supplies, like stuff like
Too
where would
late.
we get water? Yeah, I mean like if we leave. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so, just stuff like that, because you're just thinking about like pure survival, but there'll be
Hmm.
communities of people. We will find each other,
Hmm.
just like we've found each other. Like, look
Hmm.
how far we all are apart, and we'll have to go on a rescue mission for Drew.
Hmm.
So
Absolutely.
Going to the
But
down
it's
under, boys.
yeah.
from
I
those
think you're
damn
right too.
spiders. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, run away.
Ah!
I think you brought up a good point, Heidi, too, is 2020 was like a good litmus test. So,
Yes.
you know what I mean, for a lot of people. So it's just gonna get a lot harder, man. But I think you just have to just always just remember, just set your mind on Christ, man. Just remember what's at the end of the road. And that's what's gonna help. But they can't stop the gospel being spread until we're all dead. I mean, plain and simple. You know what I mean? And whether that's they're killing us, or the rapture, right? At some point, like it says in Revelations, people of the world are gonna thirst for the word, and they're not gonna find it. So I think at some point, and again, I have no proof of this. This is my opinion. I think at some point between now and then, there's gonna be, they're gonna scrub all the Bible, the gospel. They're gonna scrub that all from the internet. I don't know what that looks
Yep.
like or how that plan plays out. It's gonna happen. It's gonna get scrubbed from digital media, and it's gonna get scrubbed from physical media and book. There's gonna be some type of quasi book burning to get rid of the
If
physical
you've
word.
if
Digital
you've
now
looked at
too.
John Kerwin's work on Mandela
Mm.
effect of the Bible, you know how it's going to play out because it's already
Hmm.
changed.
Yep.
So
John, and that's actually, thanks for bringing that up. John, if you never heard him talk about the Mandela effect of the Bible, it is very interesting. I had him on the show one time, and he did. It was a short section about it, but that's actually very interesting. His
the
argument of
lion and
the
the lamb, right? Like
yep,
I know that was the lion, and
yeah,
the wolf
yeah,
means something completely different. And it blew my mind. And that's how
mm,
they're going to do it. That's what they're going to do.
hmm,
So,
absolutely.
Are
So
you sure
that
that's what it says?
of
yeah,
course,
he got me
sure.
good, calling a
Disney did
couple
a
of them.
short animation about it. It was definitely a lion because I remember the cartoon. That's how they
Same.
play
I
it.
had the little lunchbox. I'm old enough. I had like a little lunchbox with this on it and a little Bible thing. And I remember this vividly. And other people that I talk to do not. They do not. It's weird. It's
It is
weird.
weird. It is very
I
weird.
don't
But that's definitely coming down the pipeline. So as far as what to do, man, like Heidi was saying, just you gotta just mentally prepare yourself and just remember God, remember Jesus on the other end of it all.
And fear is that
Yep.
ultimate motivator in these situations. And whether people succumb to getting a beep boop during the times of COVID or not, it wasn't just a litmus test, it was an awakening experience. Because I think the majority of people who did go ahead and take it, I'm one of those people. I buckled under fear of finances, how I'd keep a roof over my family's head, how I would keep my career that I love, how I would do all the things of this
Mhm.
physical world. That drove fear into my heart. That is ultimately what made me do it. Since finding Christ, I now know that fear is an ultimate weapon of theirs, but it's something we can fight back against. The Bible states 365 times, do not fear, do not live in fear, do not be afraid. And that is the greatest weapon we have. We are the third temple. We are Christ on earth because he came for us. He showed us the way. And if we have that in our hearts at all times, and we know the truth that, like Heidi said, this physical world, it is lovely, it is amazing, it's a great place to be in, but it's not the be all to end all. There are other things after this that are far more important, where our true home is. And we're just here for the time being. And whether you're someone who lives in this existence and passes away naturally, or your life is taken from you, as a Christian most likely will be in the future, don't be afraid. Like Heidi said earlier, you better make sure that axe is sharp. Better make sure that sword isn't blunt, because I'm ready.
Yep. Yep. I
Even what
think
Christ
that's
said is
what
don't.
they're so afraid of. Yeah, that's what they're afraid of, that we're not afraid.
That's what Christ says. So don't worry about those that can kill the body. Why? Because if it's true, well, like I said before, the former sons of God that we got in Job, when they were approaching the throne, and then Genesis 6:4, if Christians are taking over the former rebellious council as being loyal, they proved their loyalty. They didn't want fleshly desires. They didn't want things of this earth. In exchange, what are we getting? We're getting their place. So part of the thing that scares them is, now that we're indwelled for his being his high priest, with that temple veil being ripped into, that terrifies them, because they're over here going, you're literally getting everything I used to have. There's a reason why they're mad at us. If we understood the levels and tier levels of our spiritual warfare, we would appreciate the rewards that are going to come through all our trials and struggles 10 times more. And I think a lot of Christians, they're afraid to even put their tippy toe in the shower into the pool.
And
Scary
people always
place.
neglect the miracles that we see every day. People
Mm.
who it can be very easily, you can easily be blackpilled when you go down the path of finding faith and Christianity, when you see a lot of the trials and tribulations we will have to go through as Christians living through end times. It's
Mm.
horrific, it's dark, it invokes fear to a degree. But you only have to look out the window. Look at this wonderful world we're allowed to live in. Despite the governments and the authoritarians and the crazy laws that are out there, if you put all that behind you, just go outside and you breathe the air and you see the sun and you feel the warmth on your skin, that is a gift that we have every single day. And we should be thankful for that as well. We don't have to throw the baby out of the bathwater because some dark entities have run on the lease at the moment, because we know that's coming to an end. They can change a few light bulbs, put in some new furniture, maybe paint a few walls, but ultimately the bones and the foundation of this world are beautiful and an amazing gift still to live in.
And everything they do is just a fake anyway. So, right.
That's right. They're just putting up fake little dividing walls everywhere, turning a 6 bedroom into a 12 bedroom where everyone has to be
There
tightly
you
packed
go.
in, living in the pods.
I mean, if you want to trust your government, all you have to do is look at what happened with Hurricane Helene.
Mm.
Or the Maui
Are you not entertained? Yeah, exactly.
wildfires. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, it's all being
And
manufactured right in front of
scary.
us, and most
Yeah.
people aren't seeing it. Because what did the Bible also say? There's going to be, people being given in marriage. Everything's going to look and appear normal. It's just little micro until one day it's like, It's happening now in real time since 2020, and you are just tuning out everybody that was warning you, saying, does this feel right to you?
The one world religion's already happening. When I saw the Mormons infiltrate Italy and go and build their temple down the street from the Vatican, I went, boom, there we go. It's already happening. It's already happening. I said that to somebody the other day that's Catholic, and they're like, you lie. And I'm like, do a Google. And they did, and they were shocked right on air. And I'm like, I know I never say anything I don't know on air because I don't like to look dumb. Like, no.
What year did that happen, Heidi? Do you happen to know?
I think it was 2 years ago.
That
Off the top of
coincides
my
with an
head.
explosion in soda sales in Vatican City.
Yep. Well, there you go. They do love they call it pop.
Pop. Wow.
Yeah, pop.
We call them soft drinks because it's not alcohol.
Yeah, Mormon crack. That and energy drinks.
Like Monster
Wow.
and all these other things have weird symbolism on them. Goodness.
Let alone, they are actually toxic to your kidneys, and don't drink those. Yeah, that's I'm a nurse. Don't do that. It's a bad idea. So, yeah.
Well,
says the girl that drinks.
Take my word for it.
I drink no energy drinks, but I haven't beat that soda. Pop.
So we had Luca's idea of where this is heading. Heidi, what do you see happening potentially within the next 3 to 5 years with the way that things are currently trending in regards to free speech and what we can and can't share on the internet?
I do think there is a little bit of hope on one thing is the anarchists have already done a lot of work on making their own hosting for this and for this whole crisis since 2020, which is fantastic because they've got a whole plan for if this shuts down. And I've just recently kind of delved into that and went, well, that's fun. But I do think it will become very difficult for us. There will be comm cards. The comm cards are already happening with the military. Military is always the first place, or 3-letter agencies where they do their trial runs. They've already done that. I give the guys their comm cards to go dial up all the time when I'm at work. So I know it's a thing. It's real. I've seen them. I've held them. I've touched them. So it's coming, it's just a matter of time. I think that's kind of what they did as far as trial runs with the pornography is they were like, let's see if this works for this. And then they like did a little soft run there. They always do these little funny things that you'll notice if you have eyes to see and ears to hear, right? Like, so that's all coming in for a close. I do believe religion, the one world religion, has already been established. I do think the seats are already spoken for and everything is set up and ready to go there. I don't think that there will be much argument as far as that is concerned for like the major religions of the world, right? Like that are established for now. I think that those of us that hold fast are going to be 2020 times 2020. It's going to be a mess. You saw how we were all treated. I mean, I know how I was treated. I was a conspiracy theorist nurse that didn't want to do any of that. Yeah, that was fun. And so, you're going to be treated like utter crap. If you think this is going to be a fun time, you might want to prepare yourself because it's not, and you're really going to have to work to hold fast to the things that we all know are happening all around us every single day. So that's where I'm at, and just try to prepare the best you can, but also be prepared that it can be a complete shit show, and just keep your faith, because faith is that which is unseen. So 100%.
Brandon, how about
And if
you,
you
brother?
get depressed, read Job. Sorry, one more thing. If you get depressed, read Job. Sorry. Yeah.
I think it's going to become a very Christian nationalist movement. Again, elements of Project 2025 of like, oh, we're getting rid of porn, we're getting rid of this. So this is all the good stuff for and again, it sounds really good. A savior figure is finally fixing what's wrong in our society and in this world. And ever so slightly, I think that's going to be like everybody chasing the carrot on the proverbial stick. And that just slowly envelops us. And I think within 27 and 28, if the years ahead, quote unquote, are true with Google Images. I'm just saying it was kind of weird that it was showing. I think in 27 was it? I can't remember what was in 27. Was it the World Cup or 20? Was that 2026? Maybe it was 2027. They said Armageddon, and a rabbi after Trump's shooting was saying something about there's going to be an announcement on October 2nd of 2027 in relation to Trump and the third temple. They had 2028 with Jesus and Satan doing an arm wrestling match, and in 2029 alien invasion. And ironically enough, I was pitching something. I said I don't think real Christians would need to be around for a Project Bluebeam scenario. We're not necessary anymore, because that's the great deception of all heightened. It's like we've already been moving towards this. Now it's just saying, oh, we're going to help you reach that point on your own. He didn't show up with the rapture. He didn't save his people. I know, Christians. It's okay. It's okay. We're going to help explain that. And all these other religions, they were right too. And we're going to help you find your real way to finding God within yourself. I think that's what's going to gradually happen. And a lot of people who have not been digging in the word, or they've been calling conspiracy theories, call it what you will. I think those are the people that are going to be literally the ones throwing us up, tossing us, ratting us out on the pyre of it's for the good of humanity, and you're against patriotism, you're against the government, you're against whoever I'm in love with, fill in blank of celebrity, idol, person you want. That's where I see it going within the next 3 to 4 years. I don't even think I'd have to say 5, because I truly think if the elements of Antichrist are already at play, when you understand what the occult is doing with these hurricanes, creating these man-made give us peace and security scenarios, I think that's what we are, is that we are this close on a linchpin, but it's going to be very micro, that a lot of the other ones aren't seeing it because they're like boiling frogs, where a lot of Christians, like Heidi just said, if you have the glasses on, you're going, guys, it's getting worse. No, it's not. Oh yes, it is.
I saw him turn the dial up. We're boiling at a faster rate now.
Yes. Yes.
I tend to agree with you guys, and it's not as a means to sound black-pilled, but when you consider the idea of a fourth turning, like good times create weak men create hard times create strong men, we're at the point where you could say communism, socialism, woke culture has accelerated at such a fast pace. It's created almost a collective frustration and hatred within what I would say is the majority of the population in the West. They're sick, they're over it. It's a very small percentage of a population that are pushing this via governments and NGOs, that it's going to backfire, it's going to flip, but it's going to be a controlled situation in which we might see, like what Brandon mentioned, a Christian nationalism could take root. We're seeing a lot of young, disenfranchised, angry young men turning to the faith, but they're turning it into it as such a way that it's almost a suit of armor for war on a physical
Just
plane
hope.
instead of the spiritual war. And I think they're going to take this on board, and they're going to use that passion, that fire, to go after the people that they think have done them wrong. They're going to go after the people they think have ruined society, have taken what's fundamental and core to our culture and inverted it. And we're going to see some atrocious things be done under the name of Christianity again. And that's all going to be weaponized via an integrated system that could be a digital ID, a national ID, a misinformation, disinformation approach in which governments will retrospectively look through your entire history on social media and find one or two things that were of a certain persuasion or of a certain narrative, and they'll be doing local door knocks and collecting people off the streets. Once that's done with, when the bad guys that these Christian nationalists have been pointing to as being evil are taken off the board or dealt with, that's when they start coming after everyone else. They can't start coming after the true Christians, people who have been seeing through this. They've been wearing the glasses to know what's happening. And unfortunately, I think those nationalized Christians, and I say nationalized first because they put nation above God, these
Yes.
nationalized Christians are going to see the nation before God, and they're going to commit all kinds of atrocities against fellow Christians that they will deem to be heretics. They'll deem them to be fundamentalists. They'll deem them to be apostates, whatever loaded term they're going to use. It's going to be Christians, I think, that'll ultimately take out Christians. And yeah, at that point, who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? I think the full deception comes in after that. Blue beams, demonic arrivals, all these things in which the chessboard's reset for the final showdown. And I hope that I get to see a lot of that happen for the sake of being able to see it, because think of the historical implications of being a person around for that. The historian in me is almost tickled pink with the idea of seeing such amazing things happen, despite how terrifying they're going to be. Living, it's probably going to be goddamn terrible. But like I said, if we live without fear and we know what's truly important, hopefully we can save a few people along the way.
Yes. Yes. I think that's exactly how I feel, Drew, is that it's a dust vault, which is, the Crusades. That was the mentality. If you do it for God and country, or if you go do this, you'll save somebody from purgatory. It's the same mentality that's happening in a lot of denominational Christian churches, or, nationalist aspects. It's like, why can't I have Christ and country? Why can't I have the world and the word? Why can't I have scripture and science? It's like, well, God and government, what are you telling me? I can't have both? No. You have to get rid of the things of this world. That is in essence Christianity, is learning to die to self daily of the cultural thing for Christ. And I think counterfeit Christians are going to be the ones that are slaying the real Christians, and they think they're doing it in God's name. Depart from me, I never
Brown
knew you. We did all
shirts.
that from you.
Brown shirts.
Big
Yep,
time.
brown
Yes,
shirts. And
exactly.
remember what happened to the brown shirts, people. Before you go against your brother in Christ, you remember what they did to those people. Because
Yes.
and if you don't know what I'm talking about, you go look it up, because it's scary. So
Mhm.
I think you're right.
Well, one only needs to look at
All
the
right.
rise of Patriot Front in America and the National Socialists in Australia, in which there's a lot of young, military-aged, fit young blokes getting around with all the same uniform on, spouting a lot of ideas which in some ways seem great, like having a cultural identity, being proud of yourself, but the mechanisms and the means in which they're going to try and achieve that, most likely with the state's backing in the future under some kind of a demonic rulership, is going to be horrific for all of mankind. Because when you weaponize a young man that has no future prospects, but is sold a lie that that's their only way of salvation, they can move heaven and earth to achieve a goal. And that's the danger that we've seen throughout all of history, in which mankind has been pitted against their brother.
Mm. You don't have a purpose, you become a pawn in another man's game.
Absolutely.
And if you're pissed off enough, you're really dangerous. So
Big time.
yeah.
I'm thinking of like one of those Marvel covers, Civil War, where we're all just doing the face-offs like we're about to go down. It's coming to a head, and I'm somewhat excited like you, Drew, and the other aspect, I'm like, Heidi, just, you guys are taking forever. Just do it already. Just do it.
It really is bittersweet, though, isn't it? When you look
Yes.
at it, like the implications of how dark and terrible things get, yet you know what the outcome is going to be. It's a
Yes.
it's a
If I die
strange
before I
dialectic.
use the go bag, I'm gonna be pissed. I'm just kidding, but have them.
I didn't even get to eat that Cliff Bar. No.
Jeez.
Well,
I gave my
guys,
kids that for Christmas.
a go bag or a Cliff Bar?
Go bags for real.
God, I wish you were my mum. That'd be fun.
My kids were like, this is weird, but okay. I'm like, you're gonna thank me one day. Yeah.
Guys, this has been a great conversation. Thank you again for coming on. Can be dark at times discussing these things, but we do need to point out the things that are the current reality in the world which we live in, the things that are happening that, for the most time, people take for granted. We have the eyes to see, so we see them as they're happening. Unfortunately, the broader majority of people, they can only see things via hindsight. And hindsight's going to be that absolute thing where they see all those small little events come into fruition for them, and they'll realize that they've been duped the whole time. And the people that were trying to save them or help them along the way were cold loonies, conspiracy theorists, fundamentalist Christians, every bad word under the sun. Eventually people will realize what's happened, and hopefully, we can get them out of that issue before that happens. Close out the show, Heidi. You're back. Would you be able to finish us off with a prayer, my friend?
Absolutely. Dear God, we thank you for our time to meet together and to find friends that have like minds in all the areas of the world, and be able to come together in your name. And that is church. So two or more in your name is church, and we don't have to behold to any man in a dress. And we know that you know that, put that in our hearts and help get that to other people. help us all to be prepared and kind, and remember that not everyone is where we're at, and that we don't black pill people badly, but still try to help them along the way. Help us to go where we're supposed to go and do what we're supposed to do, and continue in your name only. And in Jesus Christ of Nazareth's name, amen.
Amen.
Amen. And on
So-
that note, guys, we'll catch you next time.